Hello Midnights. Thank you for tuning in. Up next, Echoes of the Forgotten Ritual. Let us know where you are listening from and don't forget to subscribe. A solemn warning, the veil between worlds is thin, and ancient powers sleep soundly for a reason. To seek them out, to disturb their slumber with reckless curiosity, is to invite a darkness that no mortal mind can comprehend, and no living soul can escape. Some secrets are best left buried, for their awakening promises only unending torment. The old abandoned mill stood on the edge of Blackwood Forest, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the bruised twilight sky. For Ethan, Sophia, Olivia, and Jake, it was just another Friday night, another dare to conquer the local legend. They'd heard the whispers of a forgotten ritual, of a creature trapped within the mill's crumbling foundations. They thought it was all just a childish game. Armed with flashlights, a dog-eared book on local folklore Sophia had found, and an unhealthy dose of adolescent bravado, they ventured inside. Dust motes danced in their flashlight beams, illuminating discarded machinery and cobweb-draped corners. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and a perpetual chill seemed to emanate from the very stone, a chill that hinted at something ancient and long dormant. In the center of the main floor, beneath a gaping hole in the roof that allowed a sliver of moonlight to pierce the gloom, a faded, almost indistinguishable symbol was etched into the grimy concrete. It was an intricate heptagram, 7 points forming a star within a circle, each point connected by faint, barely visible lines. According to Sophia's book, The Whispers of Blackwood, it was a seal of binding, designed to contain something ancient and malevolent, meant to hold a primordial entity at bay. The book warned, in faded script, that to disturb it was to invite an untold horror. Sophia's book, The Whispers of Blackwood, wasn't just a collection of local ghost stories. It was a centuries-old tome, bound in weathered, dark leather that felt disturbingly like dried skin. Its pages, brittle and yellowed, detailed the chilling history of the Blackwood Coven. This was no ordinary group of sorcerers. Whispers of their origins traced back not to human lineage, but to pacts formed in forgotten glades under moonless skies, their bloodlines entangled with archaic forces. They were said to be the descendants of those who conversed with the very shadows of the world, granted forbidden knowledge and power that twisted their souls over generations. In the early 17th century, consumed by an insatiable hunger for ultimate power and the unraveling of cosmic secrets, they performed forbidden rites, delving into dimensions beyond human comprehension, tearing holes in the thin veil separating worlds. In their hubris, they tore a fissure in reality itself, a wound that bled pure chaos. Through this tear, they inadvertently drew forth what they believed to be a shard of pure void, an entity from beyond the veil of reality. This entity, referred to only as the Shade Weaver in the ancient texts, was not a spirit, but a fragment of cosmic dread, a primordial being born from the absolute absence of light and life, a dark echo of creation itself. Legend whispered that the Shade Weaver originated from the deepest, most desolate pockets of the cosmos, from the space between stars, where light itself dared not tread, where nothingness held sway. It existed only to consume, to unravel the very fabric of existence, twisting perception and reality itself. When it first manifested, centuries ago, it brought an epic of shadow and madness. Villages withered, their inhabitants driven to self-destruction by the insidious whispers the Shade Weaver wove into their minds, parasitic thoughts that blossomed into full-blown psychosis. Forests warped, growing twisted and carnivorous under its influence, their ancient roots pulsing with a malevolent energy. It fed on fear, despair, and sanity, growing stronger with every tremor of terror it induced. Its presence alone caused minds to fracture, memories to distort, and the line between reality and nightmare to blur, dissolving the very identity of those it touched. Entire communities succumbed to a collective delusion, enacting horrors upon themselves and each other, believing they were still in their right minds, guided by spectral figures only they could see. The Blackwood Coven, realizing too late the catastrophic power they had unleashed, a power that threatened to consume not just their souls but the entire world, dissolving it into cosmic oblivion, a return to the nothingness from which the Weaver sprung, devoted their remaining strength to an elaborate, desperate attempt to contain it. Their most powerful elder, Alara, was not merely a sorceress, she was said to be a descendant of the ancient Druids, gifted with a connection to the very earth and its primordial balance, a rare purity in their tainted bloodline. Recognizing that the Shade Weaver could not be destroyed, only bound, Alara devised the Seal of Binding. This wasn't just a spell, it was a sacrifice of immense proportions, shrouded in secrecy even from the Coven's full knowledge. Drawing upon the collective life force of the Coven, a ritual that left them withered husks, and ultimately offering her own essence as the final, living anchor, she channeled the raw, protective magic of the earth itself, coaxing the very ground to participate in the binding. The heptagram, meticulously carved into the mill's foundation, a place chosen for its natural ley lines, a nexus of earthly power, acted as a dimensional lock, containing its malevolent essence and sealing the fissure between worlds. The fate of the rest of the coven after this sacrifice remained a chilling mystery. Some say they vanished into the shadows they once courted, consumed by the very darkness they wielded, while others believe they remain, eternally bound to Alar's spell, guardians of a prison they could not escape. This was why the Shade Weaver had been held captive for centuries, not because it could be killed, but because it had to be contained to prevent universal collapse, its hunger perpetually thwarted by Alar's enduring, sacrificial magic. The Latin incantation, anima clausa, carcer salutum. Nox expirat, vincula frange. Soul confined, prison unbound. Night breathes forth, chains break, was the exact counterspell, intended to sever the bonds holding it. The book explicitly warned that the ritual required not just the words, but a connection of living essence to the seal, a drop of blood from each hand that seeks the truth, to truly awaken its dormant power. It was a key, meticulously crafted for a lock they were now turning, heedless of the consequence. "All right, who's brave enough to break the seal?" Ethan chuckled, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast space, a nervous tremor betraying his bravado. Olivia, always the instigator, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and reckless excitement, didn't hesitate. She pointed to a passage in the book, her finger trembling slightly. "It says we need to trace the path of release and speak the words of severance. And a drop of blood from each hand that seeks the truth." A collective gasp escaped them. "Jake, ever the pragmatist," scoffed, "seriously? Blood? That's taking it a bit far, Liv. This is just a prank, right?" But Olivia, driven by an inexplicable, dark pull, found a rusty nail and, with a grimace, pricked her thumb, a single drop of crimson welling up. The others, caught in the morbid thrill, their better judgment drowned by peer pressure and adrenaline, followed suit, each squeezing a single crimson drop onto a different point of the heptagram. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer, like a ripple through ancient water, passed over the lines as the blood touched them, a silent acknowledgement from the forgotten spell. Following the book's obscure instructions, they gathered around the symbol, each placing their bleeding thumb on a different point of the star, their voices a nervous murmur as they recited the archaic words from the brittle page, stumbling over the ancient Latin, anima clausa, carcer salutum. Nox expirat, vincula frange. Soul confined, prison unbound. Night breathes forth, chains break. They tried to dismiss the strange, sudden drop in temperature that stole their breath, the guttural, deep creak from the floorboards above that sounded like a colossal weight shifting, and the violent flicker of their flashlights that plunged them into moments of absolute darkness. But the knot of dread in their stomachs tightened with each passing second, their minds unwilling to accept the growing terror. The moment the last, Latin word left Olivia's lips, a profound, deafening silence descended, heavier than the dust in the air. The faint shimmer on the heptagram pulsed once, brightly, then dissolved, leaving behind a faint, lingering stain where their blood had been. Then, a low, guttural moan echoed from the depths of the mill, a sound that seemed to vibrate in their very teeth, rattling their bones and threatening to shatter their eardrums. The air grew not just cold, but frigid, stinging their exposed skin and making their lungs ache, and the stench of damp earth, stagnant water, and something else, something ancient and putrid, like grave rot, filled their nostrils, gagging them. A disembodied whisper, dry and papery, slithered past Ethan's ear, a name he couldn't quite grasp, but it was accompanied by a chill that felt like an icy hand stroking his neck, sending a violent shiver of terror down his spine, leaving him breathless. The single beam of moonlight in the center of the mill seemed to darken, as if swallowed by an invisible maw. They scrambled out of the mill, their initial nervous laughter replaced by frantic, choked gasps and desperate, ragged cries. They hadn't just read a story, they had torn the page from the book and unleashed a nightmare that now clung to them like a second skin. The haunting began subtly, a creeping dread that seeped into every corner of their lives, poisoning their waking hours and invading their dreams. Shadows in their peripheral vision seemed to deepen and stretch unnaturally, coiling into unsettling shapes. A flicker in the mirror would briefly reveal a distorted, elongated face behind their own reflection, a silent, mocking presence. The distinct scent of decay would inexplicably waft through their bedrooms at night, even with windows sealed shut, making them choke on the putrid air. Sophia, the most attuned to the occult, started having vivid, visceral nightmares of a twisted, ancient face staring back at her from a black abyss, its eyes like twin embers burning into her soul, whispering promises of eternal cold that gnawed at her sanity. She woke up screaming most nights, drenched in sweat, convinced she was still being watched. Olivia, usually fearless, found herself paralyzed by an unseen presence, a crushing weight that held her still in her bed, jumping at every creak of her house, convinced something was lurking just beyond her sight, its breath a chilling caress on her neck, whispering her name. Jake, pragmatic and skeptical, began to doubt his own sanity as he heard faint, echoing screams from within his own walls, screams that seemed to shift their location when no one else was home, sometimes answering his own panicked thoughts. Ethan, the instigator, felt an oppressive, crushing weight pressing down on him, a constant, chilling presence that made his skin crawl and left him constantly on edge, like he was forever being watched. He started snapping at the others, his guilt festering into resentment. "This is your fault, Liv," he'd snarled one night, his voice hoarse with fear and sleeplessness. "You just had to prick your finger, didn't you?" One evening, as Ethan walked home alone, his usually quiet street felt eerily silent, the street lights seeming to dim as he passed beneath them. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed his front door shut with a thunderous bang, though no one was there. He turned, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, to see a fleeting, hunched figure at the end of his hallway, its eyes two pinpricks of burning red in the gloom, seemingly staring directly at him, a silent, knowing hunger in their depths. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only the pervasive, sickly sweet smell of rot, clinging to the air like a shroud, and a chilling sense of absolute violation. The spirits grew bolder, their manifestations no longer fleeting, but terrifyingly direct. Objects moved on their own with malicious intent. A heavy book hurled across Sophia's room, striking her lamp with a shattering crash, plunging her into darkness. Olivia's laptop screen flickering with distorted, ancient symbols that seemed to shift and writhe into grotesque faces, whispering threats she could almost hear. Jake's bed levitating several inches off the floor for a terrifying split second before crashing back down with a bone-jarring impact, splintering the frame and sending him sprawling. Sleep became a luxury, piece of forgotten memory. Their friendship, once unbreakable, frayed under the constant pressure of terror and blame. They were relentlessly pursued, their homes no longer sanctuaries but extensions of the mill's oppressive terror, the creature's influence spreading like a cold, insidious plague, feeding on their fear and division. Every shadow held a threat, every silence a promise of impending horror. Desperate, their nerves frayed to breaking point, their voices hoarse from sleepless nights and hushed arguments, they returned to the mill, the only place where the ancient book truly made sense, the only place they felt might offer a clue to reversing their terrifying predicament, a slim, desperate hope. The air inside hummed with a terrible, palpable energy now, the original chill intensified to an unbearable, bone-aching cold that settled deep within their marrow. The etched heptagram on the floor glowed faintly with a malevolent, crimson light, a beacon for the horror they had awoken, a scar on the world. As they stood trembling, huddling together, their eyes darting wildly into the oppressive gloom, the shadows in the mill began to coalesce, forming grotesque, shifting figures that writhed and moaned around them, their forms indistinct yet horrifyingly present, reaching out with phantom limbs. The guttural moan they'd heard before resonated through the entire building, growing louder, more palpable, until the very stones seemed to scream in unison, until a towering form began to emerge from the deepest shadows, the shadows themselves seeming to tear and reform around it, the Shade Weaver. It was not a creature of flesh and bone, but of pure, inky shadow, constantly shifting and reforming, like a sentient tear in reality, a gaping wound in the fabric of existence. Its form was roughly humanoid, but impossibly tall and gaunt, its limbs elongated and ending in razor-sharp, claw-like digits that seemed to shimmer with a frosty, internal light, leaving trails of chilling luminescence in the darkness. Where its face should have been, there was only a deeper abyss, a swirling vortex of nothingness, from which two pinpricks of malevolent, ice-blue light burned, ancient eyes that seemed to gaze into the very core of their souls, stripping away all hope, all identity. The air around it was impossibly cold, sucking the warmth from the room and from their bodies, leaving them shivering uncontrollably, their breaths misting in the freezing air. As it moved, it emitted a faint, scraping sound, like skeletal fingers dragging across stone, or the slow erosion of a tombstone, and the scent of decay intensified, burning in their throats, mixed now with the metallic tang of fear. Its voice, when it spoke, was not of this world, a dry, rasping whisper that seemed to emanate directly from their minds, echoing their deepest fears and planting seeds of madness, promising an eternity of torment. Its words warped the very air around them, making their vision swim and their thoughts twist. It was the sound of 1,000 dying breaths, compressed into a single, agonizing utterance, a chorus of despair. They saw vague, Fleeting images within its swirling depths, forgotten sorrows, ancient betrayals, their own deepest regrets, and the silent, desolate landscapes of a dimension beyond human comprehension, where sanity was a forgotten luxury. This was not merely a monster, it was a living embodiment of the void, a hungry, sentient emptiness that had patiently awaited its release. Its touch could drain the life force, its gaze could steal memory, and its very presence eroded the foundations of reality, making the world unravel around its victims, leaving behind only husks of what they once were, their minds shattered and their souls consumed. They knew then, they weren't just haunted by dark spirits. They were facing the source of them all, the primordial creature they had so carelessly freed, a cosmic horror unleashed by their adolescent folly. Their lives were no longer their own. They were merely pawns in a terrifying game that had been set in motion centuries ago, and there was no escape, no redemption. The Shade Weaver extended a gnarled, shadowy hand towards them, its intentions clear, its hunger insatiable, its presence a cold, absolute despair that swallowed the light from their eyes and plunged their minds into an abyss of terror. The screams that followed were not just of terror, but of utter, crushing hopelessness, swallowed by the impenetrable darkness of the mill. One by one, their flashlights flickered and died, plunging the mill into absolute, suffocating blackness. Only the glowing, malevolent eyes of the Shade Weaver remained, burning brighter, closer, in the all-consuming void. A final, desperate shriek tore from Olivia's throat, quickly cut off, replaced by a sound that made Jake's blood run cold, a wet, tearing sound, followed by a faint, chilling snap. Then, only the rasping whispers remained, a symphony of torment echoing through the newly awakened mill. The mill stands silent now, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the forest. But some nights, when the wind howls just right, the people of Blackwood Forest swear they can still hear the faint, echoing whispers, carried on the breeze from the old mill. And sometimes, in the deepest shadows, they catch a glimpse of four ethereal shadows, forever wandering its crumbling halls, trapped in the spectral grip of the creature they unknowingly released, their eternal torment a constant hum in the cursed air.